We arrive at the crime scene. This is a photo taken of the room after the body was taken out. Let me show you here. And here you can see the blood splatter. It is important to note that he was discovered in a locked apartment. So this was definitely a cause for concern. Also, additionally, if you look in the middle of the room, you can see some computer parts were being worked on. None of these were complete projects. And that also resulted in the cause of death, as confirmed by medical experts that we spoke to. So, something clearly went wrong here. As you can see, there was some type of explosion or some projectile that came from this this mess in the middle. So these electronic parts, something went wrong here. Something occurred that caused his death. Shrapnel basically came out, and that caused, bleeding, hemorrhaging, and it killed him immediately, effectively. And that caused the blood to smear right in front of where he was leaning against, as you can see on the counter straight ahead, and as well as hit all the way up to the ceiling. Now let's take a moment to consider one of the most important aspects of any case is motives. So Joey, he's an independent builder of computers, but he has yet to actually sell anything. So that makes it a little hard. It's not like he was on the market, per se. So he recently bought some parts from an online website. So we don't have much of a motive to go by. Now, his father is deceased. His mother says he's quite the loner. He spends a lot of time at home reading and playing video games. Seems to make sense. He does have a lot of video games, several full shelves of books, and a very high electric bill. Now, on the day of his death, we also have a library receipt, and it shows a list of books, and I will get to that evidence in a moment. So, people with known access to this apartment, basically it is himself and the landlord. So, the thing is, his rent history was perfect. There was no complaints to the landlord from neighbors, and on top of that, the landlord has an airtight alibi. So he's not considered a suspect at this time. Now, if you think about, could anybody else have access to stealing the key from the landlord's copy of the key? And the access mainframe had shown it has not been accessed in months since Joey had left his key inside at one time and he needed the landlord to help open his door for him. And on top of that, there has been no fingerprints found on the landlord's key for Joey's room. Here is a copy of the library receipt that was the day that he died. He purchased these books, and this one just shows that, okay, so he was alive at this time for sure, died a few hours after this purchase was made. So, going to investigate any possible suspect that we can possibly come up with. So, here is the next thing that we ended up doing. We went to see the seller of the parts that Joey had purchased from a man named David. So, we went to meet with him. Now, David acts very shocked, just perplexed that any investigators were there to see him at all. And so the detectives tell David that he was the last known person to contact Joey. So do they have any sort of disagreement? Any mishandling of funds or something? Because these days anything can become a motive. Anything can be a reason for murder, sadly. But that is the case in many times. Most murders are senseless. So, David says that it was just free old Transformer parts that he gave him. So they asked David if there was a fight, a misunderstanding, anything. I mean, he says that basically he just gets rid of junk to people often, and he doesn't remember specifically, but he figures it wouldn't be much of a fight or disagreement because it was free stuff. So, the next thing that they did, they got some phone records and access to David's emails. here are David's phone records as handled by his business. So as you can see here, we have a list of people and dates going all around from the time of the business starting. And so you can see Joey on January 7th, 2:22 p.m. That was their one phone call conversation when this was set up for the order made, and followed by some emails. We also took a look into the online profile for David's business. We wanted to see exactly what kind of information we could gather. And this was all public. This wasn't like it was very hard to discover or come up with any information. So we're looking at it, and his profile of David's is actually very poor. There's a lot of poor ratings and bad reviews, and these were all written by paying customers. So we were kind of going with, could that mean something? Some people often online would complain about wanting refunds due to receiving a short amount of what they ordered or receiving the wrong parts, as in stuff that they didn't even order. So that was interesting to see, and we're wondering, could that mean anything to this case? And not only that, but so with the phone calls that we saw, the list and the frequent times of them, but none of them were with Joey, just that one for the order. So that was interesting. So does that really connect them very well? Now the emails back and forth subsequently did actually show an argument. The parts that were advertised on David's online website as free, but when Joey asked for them, David said that there were actually a desired price for those parts. Now Joey already gave David his address, and David told Joey that since it was already falsely advertised as free, he would keep to his word and give him the parts for free still. And Joey even paid for the shipping. So there was an argument between those two on an email, because he wanted the certain parts, and he was happy to see that they were free, but they weren't actually free. David just advertised them poorly and didn't exactly do the best work. But so even with all that, David agreed to give up those parts for free because they were falsely advertised as such, and Joey even paid for them to be mailed out. He paid the shipping fees and the postage. So does that count as much of a motive? Kind of hard to say. Detectives did confront David on the argument that did ensue from the email exchanges and questioned him as a possibly motivated suspect for killing Joey. And David basically said, well, he's talked to a lot of customers, and it's hard to remember which one was which. But he does remember that argument now, after being reminded. And yes, after the email argument, he basically said he didn't want to take the fall and get another bad review. He couldn't afford that for his business. So he took the fall. And he, said, okay, I'll give you the stuff for free as advertised. So that's what we got out of him then. Now, detectives heard from forensics. Joey was working on new parts for a transformer on his work desk. And, they were trying to be put together through pieces that he had bought and purchased. And he was reading his books at the time on how wiring a transformer for a computer. Now, the pieces of the explosion revealed that the transformer piece was a really old one. This was outdated by today's standards. So, no other transformer part was in his apartment. Shocked and confused, was this a clue here? Did David send Joey the wrong parts, knowing his project could kill him, for revenge and avoiding another bad review to ruin his reputation? The forensics team showed the detectives the book. It was recently ordered, so in other words, Joey must have been an amateur at his work. He hasn't sold anything, we already knew that, but he checked out the books on circuitry and computer parts and such, and the morning of his death at the library is when he got the books. So, he didn't know how to build this computer. He didn't know how to operate the wiring on this transformer. But where does that leave David? Did he believe that Joey was new to this, that he was an amateur at building these parts and such, and that he thought he could send him the wrong part to get him killed in the process? And here's another interesting fact. Let me show you something on the crime scene photo here. Do you see what that is? Do you notice it? Why is that over there? Why was that not worn on Joey during the time of this project? I mean, if you need glasses to read, then clearly you're going to be using them at the time of doing a project that you're new at. If you're new to something, you have to read up on it, which he bought books for, clearly, and yet his glasses are elsewhere. Why would his glasses not be worn on him during the time of a new project that he's working on for the first time, or one of the first times, or whatever the case may be? So, that didn't make much sense. Now, why did he have his glasses off? Basically, what happened is we talked to his mother, and that revealed something. He doesn't need his glasses for reading. He actually needs them to see far away and for driving. Okay, so he doesn't need his glasses for reading. So that was interesting. So, what that kind of gave us an idea into something very unfortunate. So due to that being the case, that means he must have had his head, therefore his eyes, very, very close to the death trap that took place. If he had to read something, he's going to have his face close to it with the eyes that he had. So that was very, very unfortunate for him, because then he didn't have much of a time to react if any noises or any sudden scary moments were to take place. He wouldn't have much time to react, being that his face would be right there. On a hunch, detectives thought of something. They looked back at some other pieces of the evidence, and they decided, let's take a look at the phone records again. And it kind of revealed something that they didn't notice the first time. Sure, there were a lot of different names, as you can see, but you notice something else? And keep in mind, this is the full phone log. It is fairly new. As you can see, it only goes back a couple of weeks, basically. So therefore, it reveals another problem. David was also an amateur. He was also new at this work. I mean, why else would he have this business started? And as you can confirm from the phone log, there isn't that many numbers there to begin with. Going all the way back to the beginning wasn't that hard to do. If you glance at it, you see a lot of names, a lot of different times and dates. But if you really look at the difference in space, as in space of time, it is not that far-fetched away. It is very close. It is very, very close. So he was new at this too, as we confirmed from looking at the phone records. And the online profile as well can reveal the beginning date of when this all started publicly, and so on and so forth. So, they had to produce a warrant, and they had to go look through David's belongings. They searched and searched and searched. Now, they didn't find any books or anything on his computer about how to sabotage a transformer to explode. So, they searched throughout his inventory, and when they went through his transformers, they did find something. You know what they found? They found a lot of them were in labeled bags incorrectly. That's right. Some of them were the old ones, just like the one Joey ordered, but they were in the wrong labeled bags. Bags labeled as the newer models that were actually holding older models inside. The detectives basically had a disagreement at this point. So, one detective has the idea, let's charge David with premeditated murder. That he labeled the bags as newer transformers, sent them to Joey to have him killed, knowing that the overabundance of electricity in these older model transformers couldn't handle the circuitry and would explode, unlike the newer model transformers that Joey thought he was getting. Okay? Because if you apply too much electricity to a circuit, creating an overcurrent situation, which in turn can cause an explosion. Okay? And that obviously is going to be the case if you're dealing with an old one that isn't strong enough to handle the features of a newer model. Okay? So, the other detective points out that there is flaws. See, why would a lot of these bags be missorted? I mean, couldn't it be because David was new at this stuff? No real evidence suggests that he knows what he's doing. And the biggest flaw is that there was no There was no long, overly drawn argument, anything that was heated, anything that showed any sort of passion in this case. So there was a lot of things to worry about, and the customers had confirmed online with their reviews, of course, that there was nothing but trouble ordering from him anyway. So it's not like Joey was the only person that got something that he didn't order. So we have a lot of ways we could look at this, but let's try and consider all of them. Before they just arrest him on the spot and try and go off of all of the available evidence, okay, one detective had a hunch, and they decided to take that detective's advice. They went to tell David, "Thank you for your cooperation. We're sorry we had to bother you. We were just doing our job. Now, we will be forced to eliminate you as a suspect. Thank you for your time and patience." So they set up an operation. That's what they told him, but they set up an operation in secret. So they waited a month, or a little over a month, I should say. They made a fake online account, these detectives did. With that being said, they ordered a very new Transformer model and paid a very expensive price for it via David's business. So, in 3 days, they received their package. And guess what, folks? It was the wrong Transformer. That's right. So David was declared innocent. He was so amateurish that he didn't even know the difference between the good and the old model Transformers, even kept them mixed up in the wrong bags, and had this been a real purchase, they would have been severely ripped off for the money since they received the wrong Transformers. But it also proves that David's bad customer reviews are sadly very much accurate. So all of the detectives agree this was an accidental death by horrible coincidence. Both the buyer and the seller were new to each of their respective crafts, and without David knowing that he sold Joey a week-old Transformer that could explode from the overload of wiring, applying again too much electricity to the circuit, creating an overcurrent situation which in turn can cause explosions, which happened in this unfortunate case. Both the buyer and the seller were new to these crafts of theirs. One being a salesman and a organizer, poorly at that, online salesman, phone call salesman, etc. Both of these gentlemen's ineptitude caused a seismic sabotaging of their own personal lives. In David's case, they caused a lot of hateful diatribes online, and in Joey's case, it cost him his life. So the motive was almost there if you tried hard enough to force it, but the proof was right there before the detective's eyes. The sad fact here was a very horrifying coincidence that both of these men had a lot more research to do before they could make a career out of these jobs, I guess you could say, hobbies or sorts of. So, Joey should have known by looking at the Transformer he received that it wasn't the one that he ordered. Okay, instead of operating on it with the assumption that it was the one that he ordered, he should have been able to look at that and say, hey, this isn't the one I ordered, got mad at David, and not attempted to do his job of trying to build this computer and operate on this Transformer, which caused the explosion. Because this Transformer was old, it was not going to be able to handle enough wiring that he was putting into it, or attempting to put into it, that caused his death. So, there was no suicide, no murder, but an accidental death by a horrifying coincidence. David didn't know what he was doing, and he ended up sending the wrong piece to Joey. Joey didn't know enough about what he was doing, and he ordered a certain piece that should have worked, ended up getting the wrong piece, a piece too weak that would never survive the amount of wiring he was going for, caused an explosion which killed him because his face was too close to it, as he had to be close to anything for him to read, and then caused his own death due to a very, very unfortunate lack of research. He bought the books, sure, but doing research on the fly caused him to die. This is labeled as an accidental death, a very, very unfortunate circumstance. Folks, please take this as a lesson. If you're going to do something, you don't just do the research on the fly. You need to do your research for a while. And make sure you know what you're working with. Because if you just assume that everything you're getting, you just trust, and you trust everything, and you know it's going to work in your head, well, you don't know that, and you can't know that. That's the hard, sad truth. We want to believe so. We want to believe strongly in our hearts that we can just conquer anything in our path. But the truth is, you cannot be thinking with emotion if you plan on surviving at the end of the day. I will leave you with this. A paradox to surge your critical thinking output to the spatial parameters of this episode's focal point. In Joey's case, do the ends justify the means if the means at the end weren't justified due to the platitude of research being omitted from the victim's brainwaves, accompanied by his incognizance for his ambivalence to building parts while remaining incipient to the hobby of which he contained a rudimentary understanding?